Well, tonight's speaker is from Long Island, New York. She's a lawyer. She recently got her law degree from Drake University in Iowa. She'll be talking about the Harlem Renaissance, how Harlem came to be the way that we know it today, the role that religion played, and finally the rise of Black freethinkers from within that movement. So please welcome the founder and president of Black Atheists of America, Ayanna Watson.
Okay. Thank you for having me. I'm very, very, very excited to be here, just to be able to speak to you all today. And I'm very happy to be able to give this particular speech, simply because it's a very important time in our history that's often overlooked. Again, my name is Ayanna Watson. I am the founder of Black Atheists of America. We are an organization dedicated to bridging the gap between atheism and the Black community. We primarily seek to accomplish that goal by improving education, generally speaking in America, but more specifically in poorer communities, which are heavily populated with Blacks and Hispanics. There are a number of flaws in our educational system. I'm not one to just, blame the teacher, because I honestly don't think that it's the teachers. I think it's more of our educational system on a whole. There's many players in it. The first fatal flaw I see is a lack of emphasis on critical thinking. And what I mean by that, the way that we're taught generally speaking, is we're taught to regurgitate facts. We're not taught how to think. So the teacher says A plus B equals C, and A plus B equals C. And the better you can regurgitate facts on your exams, the better you tend to do in our educational system, at least up until 12th grade, high school, the end of high school. The second major issue that I see is that history doesn't reflect history. Our history classes are predominantly white, I guess most of the people that we learn about are white males in our educational system. And I don't have I know, we're skeptics, or most of us are at least, and I don't have a peer-reviewed study, but I do, I ask, people, name me 10 white males that you learned about, grades 2 through 12, and most people can exceed 10. But then if you ask them, name, Asian American who have made major contributions to our society, most people are going to struggle. And then you go to African Americans, most people are going to struggle. Females, most people are going to struggle. So you may be asking, why does this matter? And I think it affects the psyche of our children. It instills inferiority among our youth. So if you're in a class and you're a Black female, and you constantly are learning that all these major contributions to build America to make it what it is today are people that don't look like you. It instills this idea that maybe people that look like you perhaps have never contributed anything, or their contributions aren't worth noting. They're not as important. And this is not to take away from white males who have made contributions. It's simply, I would like to see our educational system just simply more reflective of the diversity in America. And I don't mean Blacks, I mean Hispanic Americans, I mean Asian Americans, I mean females. Females are aside from Asian Americans, females are one of the hardest categories that when I ask the question to my colleagues, that for them to be able to name, 10 females that they learned about in grades 2 through 12. It's a little bit different in college because you can specialize in something like women's studies, and of course you're going to learn significantly more. But, and again, just generally speaking with regard to the American educational system, it's simply not reflective. And On the flip side of those who aren't white male, I believe, on the flip side for our youth who are white male, it instills this idea of superiority, because now you're looking at history and saying, well, everybody that's made contribution is somebody that, that maybe looks like me, or maybe looks like a family member, or something like that. So that's something that I would like to see changed. And it's not the teachers, it's our textbooks, maybe even those who contribute to textbooks. I know it's a little bit harder to find. It's not impossible. It's certainly, maybe you have to delve a little bit more to find some of people from these other categories, because maybe it's not documented as well or what have you, but it's not impossible, and we certainly could include more diversity within our classes. We see the same issue with atheism, although it's slightly different. With regard to atheism, we might name the individual. So you'll hear about people that were atheists or non-believers in our history class, but the fact that they did not believe is not mentioned. And that, I believe, would be okay if it was balanced, if we just didn't talk about these people, if we just simply didn't talk about religion. But the flip side is when they're Christian, it's always talked about like how Christian they were, how good of a person they were, how godly they were, and blah, blah, blah. And when they weren't, and if they don't fit that category, either A, we lie and say that they were Christian. That's where people get this idea that America's Constitution is based on Christian values, which couldn't be further from the truth. If you just read the freaking Constitution, for one, you would know that. Or two, if you read the history behind it, the case law behind it, we would know that as well. But, we have a bunch of people, more than I would like, that believe that it's based on Christian values. So I would like to see the fact that there were atheists, the fact that there were free thinkers, the fact that these people didn't believe, also included in our educational system as well, so that people know that we're not like unicorns. We are people that have always been here, and we've always made contributions. We're not, this new group that wants to rebel or something like that. So today I am going to speak on one of the most important eras in American history, known as the Harlem Renaissance. This is a time that wasn't simply important to African Americans. This was a time that was very important to America as a whole. One of the troubles that we have with labeling atheists, and this is not exclusive to blacks, is the fact that the term, even today we have some arguments over the term atheist and who should use it and how it should be applied, and can a person truly be an agnostic, and we go back and forth on whether whether agnostic is a true word, a good word to use, and whatever. We have different definitions for free thinkers, for those that don't believe in God. And if it's a problem today, we can imagine how it was many years ago, 100 years ago, for people to adopt these terms. And so, simply because they didn't adopt the term, we can look through the works, or we can look through their speeches or what have you, to determine how they viewed God, or whether they wanted to question religion. And that's kind of how the approach that I took, because I haven't found a black person who, during this time, who labeled themselves atheists. I have found a couple that labeled themselves agnostic, which, and then they'll make arguments that are very atheistic, if you will, in nature. But it was a term that wasn't embraced. I don't know if it wasn't, I can imagine the stigma is one reason, but then I believe at that time agnostic had the same stigma. But at the same time, I think it's a definition, like many of our words, that has kind of changed over time. So just keep that in mind with what I'm going to say in a few minutes. So it's called the Harlem Renaissance. During its time, it was known as the New Negro Renaissance, or the Negro Renaissance. It was a focal point for African Americans to express their thoughts through art. There's no concrete date that was assigned to this time period, but that's pretty much what you see with every movement. You know, you turn around one day and like, oh my goodness, there's a movement going on. I mean, we see that right now with the atheist movement. You turn around and, you know, we're in the middle of a movement. There are a couple of events that give us an idea as to, you know, that gave an idea that a movement was underway. And one of those events was a dinner that was put together by a man named Charles S. Johnson. And he was a writer, an editor, researcher, and educator. So he wore many different hats. It just depends on what day you caught him on. And he had this dinner where there were over 100 guests. And it was the first dinner of its kind that celebrated African American writers. And it was the first dinner that was able to draw this many African American artists. The dinner happened on March 21st, 1924. It was important, number one, because it had so many African American artists, but it was also important because it attracted many white publicists and critics. And their presence spoke on two issues. Number one, it showed that there was an interest in these particular artists outside of the African American community. And it also showed that they were willing to connect with African Americans. As we see even today, most of our major publishing companies are white owned. And in order for African Americans during this time to be able to reach out to a larger audience, they had to be able to make these connections. So it was a very happy moment to see that these white publicists and critics were willing to make these connections with these African American artists. Prior to this dinner, there was no identifiable, to my knowledge, there was no other identifiable event that we can really say, you know, a movement was underway. So the movement started in the early 20s and lasted about 2 decades. The country itself was going through political turmoil at this time. We were just getting over the supposed war to end all wars. There was a lot of racial tension, particularly in the South, due to the current political structure that we had here in America. It was giving, it gave strength, if you will, to white mob violence, to discrimination. And there was also a lack of jobs. There was widespread crop failure. And so due to all of these issues that were going on in the South, a lot of people decided, you know, I want to escape this particular environment. I want, you know, to do better. And so it gave rise to what became known as the Great Black Migration. And this was a time when a lot of African Americans moved from the South to the North. Just to kind of put it in perspective as to how many people were moving during this time, we had over 400,000 African Americans migrate from the South to the North. That's about 16,000 per month, or 500 people per day were moving. We also had Prohibition was alive and well, and we know how much Americans love their alcohol, so we were trying to find a way to fill this void. And Harlem was a place where they can fill this lack of entertainment due to these restrictions on alcohol. So there was a place called Jungle Alley, which is, I guess, a subsection of Harlem. And this was kind of like a come one, come all. I know you've been to like Soho, that's kind of how years ago before it became more corporate. But that's kind of the environment that I kind of look at Soho, the environment that Soho in New York City has. Where, I mean, they openly welcome gays, which is major. You know, this is a black community or welcoming gays. They, you know, the middle class came there for their entertainment, intellectual, bootleggers, drug dealers, you know, everybody was welcomed at this particular subsection in Harlem. So there's basically nothing you couldn't find there, and it was well known for its entertainment when you wanted to escape the reality of whatever was going on in your particular life. Harlem itself was going through significant economic changes. The city had actually been built for wealthy whites, and I'm not talking about like the 1%, I'm talking about like the 0.001% of the country. And this was during the 1870s. Basically, they had built these large houses, and the economy was booming at this time, and they basically overbuilt is what happened, and they couldn't fill the houses. And so at the turn of the century, the housing market collapsed. They couldn't find people, again, to fill these houses, and they ended up having to sell the houses significantly below value. And along came a guy named Philip A. Payton, and he incorporated a company named Afro-Americans Realty Company in 1905. And it was through him that landlords were willing to sell homes or rent homes to African Americans. It was through this company that they were willing to do that. And I believe that Payton's company was responsible for creating what became known as the Black Mecca, Harlem at the time. Because he was moving, because he had moved so many African Americans into Harlem, and he was able to give them these houses. He was able to provide housing at rates that African Americans could afford. And the way they basically did that was a lot of these larger homes were divided into multifamily homes and things like that. Also at this time, due to his company, Harlem had not only expanded by population, but it had also expanded in its actual radius, the size of Harlem. In 1920, there were about 73,000 blacks in Harlem. In 1930, there were about 164,000, and Harlem had expanded by 10 blocks. Again, this was an area that it really did attract many different types of people. So kind of switching gears here, with regard to the actual people that participated in the Harlem Renaissance, there was a divide, which we see pretty much again with any movement. We had the veterans who had one philosophy, and we had the younger crowd that had a different approach. And so among the veterans, W.E.B. Du Bois, Alan Locke, they believed that literature should focus on the positive aspects of blacks. They wanted to separate the black community from its less desirable stereotypes. And the new people that were coming in, such as Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, they didn't really follow that philosophy. And Langston Hughes addressed it in his essay, The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, and where he basically made an argument saying, you don't tell an artist how to express themselves. That it is they're the ones who decide how to express themselves. And he decided to speak on poverty, overcrowding, and racial prejudice, and things that were what I guess the reality of Harlem. So I'm going to read one of his poems right now. It's called Ballad of the Landlord. Landlord, landlord, my roof has sprung a leak. Don't you remember I told you about it way last week? Landlord, landlord, these steps is broken down. When you come up yourself, it's a wonder you don't fall down. $10 you say I owe you? $10 you say is due? Well, that's $10 more and I'll pay you till you fix this house up new. What? You're gonna get eviction orders? You're gonna cut my heat? I'm sorry. You're gonna cut off my heat? You're gonna take my furniture and throw it in the street? You talking high and mighty. Talk on till you get through. You ain't gonna be able to say a word if I land my fist on you. Police, police, come and get this man. He's trying to ruin the government and overturn the land. Coppers whistle, patrol bell, arrest. Precinct station, iron cell, headlines in press. Man threatens landlord, tenant held no bail. Judge gives Negro 90 days in county jail. The reason why I think it was important to talk about the realities of Harlem is the fact that we had this great migration that was going on, and news didn't travel as fast as it did today. We didn't have the internet and stuff like that, but people were traveling because they believed that they could have a better life in the North, and it simply wasn't true. They were getting there and realizing that the grass was not greener. There was widespread poverty, there was widespread unemployment, particularly among blacks. We had a number of the retail shops in Harlem were white-owned, and this was a problem because we had, scholars, people, and the same thing that we were seeing recently, or even still today, where we had people with these very prestigious degrees that were forced to take menial jobs because the unemployment was just horrific, and it's always significantly worse in the black community. There were only a few thousand members in working class during this time, and Harlem was becoming increasingly worse. It was basically home to low quality housing. And because, when you have black tenants, particularly at that time, they didn't have the same rights as white tenants. And so a lot of the landlords simply broke municipal codes. They just didn't care, they didn't keep up with it. And by the 1930s, about a third of the dwellings of African Americans lacked adequate bathing facilities. So it was a serious problem during this time. We had what was called rent parties. Basically, a rent party is a party where you provide music. It's a party, you charge people at the door. You provide music and food, and your goal is to make a profit so that you can pay your rent next week. So hopefully you get enough people to cover the cost of food and to cover, if you hired musicians or whatever it is, to cover the cost of the party, I should say. And these were becoming increasingly more popular because, again, people could not afford their rent. The church during this time had a lot of influence. The Abyssinian Baptist Church was arguably the most influential political black congregation at the time, and even today they have a very strong voice. They were led by Adam Clayton Powell and later by his son Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And the church was established by Americans, black Americans and Ethiopians who had been discriminated against in other churches. These churches were particularly different. Abyssinian church was something that was relatively intimidating for people that were coming from the South or coming from the Caribbean islands, because they were, these churches were very large. And so when you come from the South, you have that more communal feeling. We didn't have, apparently there weren't these mega churches in the South. They were only here in the North at that time, from my understanding. And so we have these people, and they're used to this communal environment where everybody knows everybody, and everybody in the neighborhood goes to this particular church, and they weren't seeing that. They were coming up here, and it was just these huge mega churches that they were being faced with. And so the church, in order to improve its congregation, to increase the size of its congregation, had to overcome that issue. And one of the ways that they were able to overcome it was offering social services to these people. Anything from housing to healthcare to just general welfare, community services, so that they can get by. And this was a serious issue when people move their family to the North and they're faced with poverty. And so the churches were certainly a safety net for these individuals. And Abyssinian Baptist Church was very, very, very successful at this time. There were about 1,600 members in 1908. By 1937, it was one of the most prosperous churches in America, and they had a membership exceeding 10,000. Again, this was due to the social programs that they were able to offer African American or to their congregation. They continue to have many of these programs available to their congregation even today. Similarly, Salem Methodist Church had a number of social programs. It was the second largest congregation at this time in Harlem, and they took a little bit of a different approach. They believed in what their motto was nurturing the whole person. And during the Harlem Renaissance, it was led by Frederick Cullen, who is the father of County Cullen, who I'll speak about in a few. And Cullen Sr. Would go around around the neighborhood and talk to the kids and do whatever, play whatever games the kids would play at that time, and really encourage their kids to encourage their parents to go to the church. And a lot of his programs, a lot of the social programs were centered around children at his particular church. This tactic was also, again, very successful in that they were able to become the second largest church in Harlem at that time. County Cullen, the son of the pastor at that time, was afforded the best education. He was considered a prime example of the term talented 10th, a term coined by W.E.B. Du Bois. He graduated from one of the best high schools in New York at that time. He received a bachelor's from NYU and went on to get his master's in English and French from Harvard University. And much of his work that he did focused on inequality and racism. Very early in his career, he began to explore inconsistencies in religious faith and racism. In his work, Heritage, which is one of his most famous works, he delves into this issue of double consciousness. And double consciousness is a term that was coined by W.E.B. Du Bois. And it was a term to discuss a lot of issues, mainly psychological issues, but also social, economic, and political challenges that African Americans face, even till today, but particularly at that time. And basically, the argument says that one can never be Black and American, because America does not truly embrace Blacks, and it was an issue. The issue was always that Blacks were trying to reconcile these two polarized identities, and so he tried to discuss why it was so hard for Black Americans to truly embrace the term Black Americans. So in Cullen's work, he writes about this two-ness through the voice of a young, educated African American boy in this poem. And throughout the poem, the reader is taken on this journey, and basically we're looking at what has the young boy been told about his ancestors versus what the young boy believes about his ancestors. And he's told, that he's inherently inferior because he's Black and his ancestors were uncivilized pagans living in squalor. And, the young protagonist says, I don't believe that. I believe that, that I have this deep connection to African cultures, that Africa is beautiful, and the continent of Africa is painted as like this beautiful Mecca in this particular writing. But what made this particular writing very controversial was that Jesus was painted as a Black person, which had not been done on this large of a scale before. And, everybody knew that Jesus was blonde hair and blue-eyed, and so it made people really angry. He subsequently wrote a number of poems, particularly on Christianity, and one of his famous works in that area was entitled The Pagan Prayer. And that is a prayer, I'm going to read a little bit from it in a second. And basically, he says, despite the prayers of Blacks, they're still living in despair. And he wants to know, why are the prayers of Blacks being ignored by their God? So I'm going to read an excerpt of it. And it says, not for myself I make this prayer, but for this race of mine, that stretches forth shadowed places, dark hands from bread and wine. For me, my heart is pagan mad, my feet are never still, but give them herb to keep them warm in homes high on a hill. Our Father God or Brother Christ, or are we bastard kin, that to our plaints your ears are closed, your doors barred from within? Our Father God, our Brother Christ, retrieve my race again. So shall you compass this black sheep, this pagan heart, amen. So although Cullen was a believer, he constantly struggled with his belief in God. And we'll see this with some of the other artists that I speak about later on. He could not understand why a good God would allow for such social injustice that ran rampant in America. The problem with a lot of these intellectuals was that not believing in God was not an option. And so, you go to these great lengths to reconcile these inconsistencies. Again, a lot of his works dealt with racism and religion. And in The Black Christ, which was another popular poem, he talked about lynchings, and he came to the conclusion that lynchings represented Christ's struggle. I don't know if anybody heard the interview that I did, was it yesterday morning, I believe, on the radio, but there was another lady there, Ali Lejeune, and she grew up in Mississippi, and she was talking about how in her church, they taught that, you should embrace the struggles that you go through in life, because it makes you closer, it says that you're closer to Jesus. And that's precisely what he did in his poem. When you take something as horrific, when you look at something as horrific as lynchings, how are we going to reconcile that? And so he kind of embraced that same line of thinking where, okay, it's a horrific thing, but how can I reconcile it? Well, you know what? It's a struggle. Christ went through a struggle. We're closer to Christ because of it. But again, he constantly took issue with what was going on, the social injustice, which were things that he constantly wanted to combat, and reconciling that with his belief in God. Similarly, we have Langston Hughes. I'm going to read a little bit from two of his works right now. One is called Goodbye Christ. I'm going to read only an excerpt from it. It says, I'll tell you a little bit about it. Basically, he's talking about the hypocrisy of religion. And this is his farewell letter to religion. So the third paragraph I'm going to read, it says, Goodbye Christ Jesus, Lord God Jehovah. Beat it on away from here now. Make way for a new guy with no religion at all. A real guy named Marx, communist, Lenin, Stalin, worker, me. I said me. And then he goes on to talk about, again, more about the hypocrisy of religion. I also wanted to share another excerpt from his writings. And I found this story particularly funny. It's called Salvation, and I'm only going to read an excerpt from that as well. But if you have time, if you want to see the actual poem, I have it here. So if you want to see it afterward, feel free to read it. The one I just read, and the other essay that I'm about to talk about. I don't have the whole essay, but if you just go on a Google search, you can find it. It's called Salvation. This is an essay of Langston Hughes when he was younger. He's writing, I guess it's an autobiography of when he was younger. So his aunt takes him to church, and they have, him and his friends are sinners. So they're put on this front pew of sinners or whatever. And they're supposed to give their life over to God. And, the church is very, I don't know if you've ever been to like a very animated church, but it's, it's very animated. Everybody's clapping and, saying, come on down and, give your life over to God. And Langston had been told that, when he is ready to give his life over to Jesus, he's going to see like the light, and Jesus is going to come to him, and he's sitting here on the pew waiting for this to happen, and it's not happening, and his friends are getting up one by one, and he keeps talking about how it's getting later and later, and he's just like waiting and it's not happening. So it gets down to two people, Langston and one of his friends. And his friend turns to him, and I'm not, obviously it's not verbatim, but says something along the lines like, I'm tired of being here. Let's just go up there and, get this over with. And so his friend gets up and goes, and, he says, oh, I'm saved now, and church claps and is, praising him. And Langston decides, you know what, he didn't get struck by lightning, so maybe it's okay, And so he gets up finally, and, his aunt, embraces him and hugs him, and she's, very dramatic and crying and so happy that he now has found Jesus. And so the part of the essay that I'm going to read is when he got home that night. It says, that night, for the last time in my life, but one, I cried. I cried in bed alone and couldn't stop. I buried my head under the quilts, but my aunt heard me. She told my uncle I was crying because the Holy Ghost had come into my life and because I had seen Jesus. But I was really crying because I couldn't bear to tell her that I had lied, that I had deceived everybody in the church, that I hadn't seen Jesus, and that now I didn't believe there was a Jesus anymore, since he didn't come to help me. So, this is quite a character there. Claude McKay was another great contributor to the Harlem Renaissance. He was a Jamaican poet. He was known because of his Jamaican dialect that he often displayed in his writings. He also spoke in his works about inequality. He was actually pretty popular in Jamaica before he came here to America in 1912. And he moved here to attend Tuskegee and to broaden his audience. He moved to Harlem 2 years later, in 1914. With regard to his religion, he grew up in Jamaica in his church, they took a very literal interpretation of the Bible. And this was apparently something that was widely accepted in Jamaica. So he was taught that blacks were forever condemned. And as an intellectual, he said that this was very difficult for him to embrace. And he started to move away from religion because of that. He was once quoted as saying that he never had any faith in revealed religion. At some point in his life, he was introduced to evolution, and which again moved him even further away from religion, because he liked the idea that it allowed for change, and that is very important for someone who's fighting for inequality. Because if you believe that you're forever condemned and this is just it and this is God's will, then there's no room for change. And so this is something that he embraced. And he also said, well, there was evidence of not simply evolution, but of social, not biological evolution, but also social change, social evolution. And so it was so much easier for him to adopt that belief. So he had. He wanted to see society to continue to evolve, and he wanted to see more progress in America. And one of his poems, he developed a character named Cujo, which was short for Cousin Joe. And this was a reoccurring character in many of his works. And in his piece, Cujo, fresh from the lecture, he explores evolution. Cujo is illiterate and speaks in Jamaican dialect. So I'm going to read an excerpt from that poem, from this particular poem, Cujo, fresh from the lecture. But I'm not Jamaican, so it's going to sound very butchered. This is not any disrespect to anybody who's Jamaican or to the writer, so I'm just giving you forewarning. This man tell us straight about how the whole thing creation can't come, and show us without doubt how God was not to blame, how change caused everything to mix upon the earth, and that most hardship come through accident or birth. So McKay, I think it's notable look at the fact that he used a non-intellectual to describe a non-intellectual character to describe evolution. And I believe that he believed that it was so simple a concept to understand that even somebody such as Cujo, this character that he created, could comprehend that this was a more likely way to explain what was going on than this literal interpretation of forever being condemned, as was taught in his Bible studies courses. Throughout his life, again, he sought to improve the status of blacks. He also, as an intellectual, had many issues with reconciling religion with his with his social injustice projects. And he went on quite an interesting religious journey. He started as a Christian, he moved to agnosticism, and finally ended up on Catholicism. When asked why he became a Catholic afterward, he said that they promoted racial equality. So I suspect that in his church, they helped promote whatever projects he was working on, and so he embraced that. He embraced Catholicism because of that. Or maybe he didn't, I don't know. A. Philip Randolph, very, very popular man. He was one of the founding fathers of the Civil Rights Movement, or the modern Civil Rights Movement, if you will. He was one of the lead organizers of the March on Washington with MLK. He was born into a very, very, very religious family. There was lots of pressure, he says, for him to become a pastor, particularly from his grandmother. He started to doubt religion, he said, very early in life, and he was quoted as saying, with regard to becoming a pastor, that he was not greatly impressed with words he used with the profession of becoming a pastor. He also wanted to address racial prejudice, and this was something, he was a little bit different in that. This was something that was spoken about in his home. His parents had, I'll call it racial pride, but not in the sense of blacks are better than whites or anything like that, but they wanted to instill self-esteem in their children. And so they said, whites are not smarter than you, you're just as competent as any white person. And I think that this played a major role in giving A. Philip Randolph and his siblings the self-esteem needed to pursue, the self-esteem that they needed to do what they wanted to do, to be successful, I should say, sorry. So he founded a magazine called The Messenger, which started in 1970. It was considered a radical socialist paper, in which he discussed what I will call uncomfortable topics. So anything that people generally stay away from, sex, politics, religion, all that fun stuff. And I will read I'm going to read an excerpt that he wrote from his November 1917 issue with regard to what, his agnostic values. So it says, our aim is to appeal to reason. Patriotism has no appeal to us, justice has. Party has no weight with us, principle has. Loyalty is meaningless. It depends on what one is loyal to. Prayer is not one of our remedies. It depends on what one is praying for. We consider prayer as nothing more than a fervent wish. Consequently, the merit and worth of a prayer depend upon what the fervent wishes. So he was definitely not a believer. He became known for his, he became well known for his labor organizing, particularly for blacks. He was first drawn to it when he graduated from college, and as I spoke about earlier, he was forced to take a lot of, menial jobs. This was a well-educated man, college degree, and, again, he was, not the degree basically wasn't appreciated, I should say. Another side note that he talks about is some of his friends and colleagues that he used to debate with in college, and according to him, he always won. But yeah, he used to have a lot of Christian debates, he says, with his friends, and he was, I'm guessing because his father was a pastor, but he says he was far more, educated, familiar with the Bible than a lot of his colleagues were, and hence the reason he would always win these religious debates. Throughout, so sorry, that was a side note, but getting back to what I was talking about, throughout his time, he was very big on encouraging blacks to organize, especially against, to protest a lot of the oppressive working conditions that they were subject to in their workplace. So by fast forward to 1942, he had attracted approximately 18,000 blacks to gather at Madison Square Garden in New York City to hear him speak against discrimination in the military, discrimination in government agencies, and also labor unions. And unfortunately, this is one of the major issues that I have. A lot of what he has done is often said to be a result of his Christian values growing up, which, I mean, if you read his own words, he says, I'm not a Christian, I'm an agnostic, I don't believe, and, on and on and on. But what's most important, what's most disturbing is a lot of times if you read biographies on him, people constantly try to discredit the fact that he was a non-believer. And if you look at what he actually said versus what these individuals are saying about him, you can see that there's a serious issue, and there's a serious issue of constantly trying to draw him into this world of Christianity. We want him as bad as they do, but we have evidence that that he was a non-believer and made major contributions within the African American community, but also generally within the American society. So I started speaking in the beginning about this issue of our educational system. I believe, and I also spoke a little bit about this issue of double consciousness, and I believe that can also apply to religion, in case you guys fell asleep or don't remember. Double consciousness was the issue of not being able to be Black and American at the same time. And so I believe that it applies to religion in that there's this belief that you can't be atheist and American at the same time. And I think that that's why it's so important that we continue to let people know that we're non-believers, that we are not, unicorns, we're real people, we're not the person way down the block that, peeks out their window, that we're people that they work with, that we're people that that they engage in whatever activity every day with, that we are members of society, and we've always been members of the American society. We've always made contributions to this society. We will continue to do so in the future. And so I know that there's a lot of backlash when we come out as atheists. So for those who can, I definitely encourage, for the retirees, they don't have to worry about their job firing them, or for those of us that have a little bit of more leeway, I definitely encourage you to speak out, to say, I am an atheist and I'm a good person. So that's all I have for today. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Oh, I want to read one more poem, sorry. This is another one from Langston Hughes, because as you can tell, I'm a huge fan, so you're going to have to bear with me. And it's called Who But the Lord. I looked and I saw that man they call the law. He was coming down the street at me. I had visions in my head of being laid out cold and dead, or else murdered by the third degree. I said, "Oh Lord, if you can, save me from that man. Don't let him make a pope out of me." But the Lord, he was not quick. The law raised up his stick and beat the living hell out of me. Now, I don't understand why God don't protect a man from police brutality. Being poor and black, I have no weapon to strike back. So who but the Lord can protect me? So that's again with him struggling, another example of, an intellectual struggling with their belief in God and not being able to understand why these social injustices continue to be alive and well. So that's really all I have now. So. Yes.
A little about your background, how you
Oh, sure. Well, I grew up in a household that was, we were semi-religious. We weren't really that religious. My dad was a deist by the time I was born. And my mom was a Baptist. She still is. She's become increasingly more religious over time. But the two of them, and even to this day, they're very big on education. And so that was very helpful. Second, they didn't do a good job in the indoctrination process. I didn't go to church. I didn't really start getting into the church until I was 9, and that's very, very late. And I guess a quick story about that. They sent me away to Bible camp, and I was like, well, I felt like the dumb kid on the block because all of the other kids had been to Sunday school, so they knew Noah's Ark and they knew the story of Job, and I'm sitting there like, what the hell is going on? I don't know any of these stories. And so, and you have to pass, we had tests in this camp or whatever, and so I wasn't doing well on a test. In the beginning I was failing. And, I never fail like that. It's totally like, I'm called, never ever. That's just not cool. So I ended up spending a lot of my free time studying these stories because I was so far behind the curve, or maybe ahead of the curve, or however you look at it. So because, I finally graduated, I was a good Christian, I got my little certificate at 9, that's what I was talking about earlier. So I was a Christian, and I still didn't go to church a lot. I went on the days you're supposed to go, Easter, Mother's Day, and Christmas. But fast forward to high school, I went to Lutheran high school, which moved me from Christianity to deism. We were required to read the Bible, and so I got to a verse. I don't know what I think it's Leviticus 18:22. I keep saying that. I don't remember the verse though. And it basically said that being gay was an abomination. The problem is, on my dad's side, we have a bunch of people in entertainment, which I'm going to argue that it's a better field. It's a field that's more acceptable to homosexuality. And so I had gay family members and also friends of family members that were gay. And then growing up in New York, I don't know if you're going to go through an entire educational process, without meeting gay friends or gay people, at least, even if you don't befriend them. So I had gay friends, gay family members, and so I knew that there were two options. Either the Bible was wrong or God wasn't good. And God wasn't good wasn't an option. So it was I guess that's not a literal interpretation of deism, but it was close enough. So I rejected the Bible. And then I was pretty much a football fan, so I didn't like going to church on Sunday, so I made up some excuse for that too. And so I had rejected the Bible, I rejected church by that time. And then we moved, fast forward to college, I took Philosophy 101 and I became an atheist, although I didn't know at first because atheist, it was a devil worshiper in my mind. And so since I didn't worship the devil, I wasn't an atheist. And it took some learning, some research to figure out that, oh my God, I am an atheist, everybody else has it wrong. And then I took a course on comparative religion. And that moved me to activism because I began to see how it affected society. How I was one of those passive atheists of live and let live until I actually saw what it was doing to the community, particularly the black community, which I identify with most. And I started the organization in 2010. So that's the long answer. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Can you talk a little bit about the stuff that Black Atheists of America does in education?
I planted her.
Really?
No, I'm just kidding. We have one major program that we do right now. It's called Science Cubed. It is a program where we give supplies to schools in need. A school in need is defined as a school that has 40% or more of their students are on reduced lunch or free lunch, well, reduced lunch or more, I guess I don't know how to word it, but 40% or more are at least on reduced lunch. I go to the teacher. I have a lady that I work with who helps me evaluate the teachers. Right now we're only looking at science programs. Next I'm going to move to history, to social studies, I guess it's called, because of everything that I said in the beginning of the speech. So yeah, we donate supplies to schools in need, and the teacher has to have the scientific method at the center of her curriculum. She has to emphasize the importance of it, and it has to constantly be re-emphasized to the children so that they know. And it's not to make every kid a scientist. I'm not even into science like that. But it is to make sure that kids are instilled with critical thinking skills. And so I learned that, I think it was adoptaclassroom.com, that teachers on average come out of pocket $1,500 a year just to do their job. And teachers don't make that much money, so that's just horrible. But it's worse in poorer communities. And so I give schools about I give schools $600 based on donation. So each school that we've that's gone through the program has received $600 each year. And apparently it goes a very long way. The teacher gives me a list because they're in the best position. I'm not going to just randomly give them supplies. They're in the best position to know what they need to better teach their kids. And so we've done everything from, updating their DVDs. I mean, some of these kids have DVDs from 1950s that they just can't relate to dissection kits. So we had a marine biologist teacher. We gave her squid dissection kits for the kids. We can't do books, but we can do, I don't know, books are kind of weird. You have to fund the whole district, and I just don't have the resources for that. Posters for the classroom, just whatever the school needs that can fit within the $600 budget we provide for the schools.
You have a website?
Yeah, the website, and I planted him too. The website is www.blackatheistofamerica.org, and there's a donate button on our site.
You can link that? Where's Clint? We'll link it from our website.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
Our photographer is also our IT guy.
Nice, multiple hats, I can relate. Yes?
How did you get your group started? How did you gather people that agree with you? How did you find them?
Online. I got my group started online. I started in January 2010. It didn't become incorporated until July 2010. And I just kind of went on Facebook. We started with a handful of people, and now we're just shy of 4,000 because of Facebook. Social networks are great. There's a ton of closeted atheists, and so we let them know. The problem is a lot of times people they're socialized or connected to religion, and so they don't want to come out and say, I'm an atheist, then what? So we're trying to create, or we have created, a network outside of being online for people to come and meet and not be bombarded with the God talk. So that's what we do. Any other? Yes.
When you tell other people in the Black community that you're atheist or that you have an atheist organization, what's the most common objection that they have to you or your atheism?
Well, see, the reason why we're a little bit different is because we connect, in our community, it's a slap in the face to our ancestors. And so there's this false belief that, had we not had Christianity, we wouldn't have been able to overcome any social injustices, slavery, civil rights movement, and that couldn't be further from the truth. We had all different types of people that participated in these movements. Martin Luther King was right-hand man. I talked about A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, another non-Christian, Quaker. I still say he's an atheist. Some others argue he's an atheist. But at minimum, he wasn't a Christian, But no, we don't hear about we hear about Bayard Rustin, we hear about A. Philip Randolph, but we don't hear about the fact that they were not Christian. Also, the church was a great meeting place. It was a place where, number one, you're going to be left alone. It was a place where those outside the community could talk to people within the community in one space. It was a great place to gather resources. And instead of looking at it as the church as a great place to gather resources, people attached to religion and say, no, it was the religion that got people through it. Instead of looking at it as a physical building where people can be left alone, be able to organize, be able to get information out to a large group of people. Another thing that's not talked about, Martin Luther King actually spoke out against the black church. Not all of them, but what his complaint was, we have a lot of these churches that are saying that they're doing things, and they're not doing a lot of the things that, they're supposed to be doing. They're not helping the black community. They're simply taking tithes, and that's it. And so that's something that, a lot of people don't talk about, his complaints about the black church. I obviously believe that he was, still a Christian and all, but at least he spoke out against, churches that weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing.
The others that where their good works are attributed to their Christian upbringing and whatever, and never related to their non-belief.
Mm-hmm.
And then I see, how that also comes into legal processes and stuff, those kind of conversations. And would you talk some about that and how that can be?
What do you mean by legal processes?
Well, when decisions are being made, people try to bring that into the conversation too, about they were a good Christian parent or.
Oh yeah, that's a major issue. I'm an attorney in New York, and I don't see it in New York because I'm a new attorney, and I also practice in Iowa, and it wasn't an issue. It just wasn't an issue, but. In any of my cases, I'm not saying that it's not an issue generally, but I have had friends. One of my friends is a lesbian who suppressed her sexual orientation because of the church. And she was in a custody, she's also an atheist, and she was in a custody battle, and that was like their ammunition. She's an atheist. Well, she's a lesbian and worse. She's an atheist, she can't raise a kid. But the problem is, you can't the problem that a lot of attorneys, and it's not simply atheists, but it's people that deal with this issue of separating religion, separation of church and state, is that it's hard to say, well, the judge solely based their decision on that, because it's supposed to be based on the best interest of the child. And so it's usually not just, this person's as far as the information that's provided, it's not just, oh, this person's an atheist, this person is a homosexual. It's a bunch of information, and then, of course the judge is not going to say, well, I'm pretty biased against, non-Christians. And so it's hard to it's done, obviously, but it's hard to make the argument because it's basically your word against the judge, and, without some overwhelming evidence of him or her, without some other evidence outside of that, it's really hard. So, I don't know if that answered your question. That's with regard to family law, custody battles.
Yeah, should it even be in the
Oh, no.
discussion? And then things like, swearing on the Bible, the
Yeah.
oath on the Bible, and just little phrases that come into all of our.
Yeah, well, it definitely shouldn't be there in my. It's not even my opinion. It shouldn't be there. It disgusts me every time I walk into a courtroom and behind the judge's head I have to read "In God We Trust." With regard to the Bible, my clients have never sworn on a Bible. It's not that they're atheists or anything. It's that a Bible's never been given to them. They just raise their right hand and swear. I assume all my clients are Christian, just by statistics. So we've never had an actual. In my cases, there has never been a Bible present in the courtroom. But you have the right, you could ask for you have the right to affirm that instead of swearing, but no, it shouldn't be there. Yes.
I just heard a thing this last week when George Zimmerman was accused or charged with second-degree murder. Trayvon Martin's mother came on and said, "Thank you, Jesus," instead of "Thank you, prosecutor."
Yeah. Or how about all the people that lobby?
I'm just blown away. Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah. And the funny thing, there was an ongoing joke in Black Non-Believers Facebook group that said, "Watch, as soon as they arrest Zimmerman, it's going to be thank you Jesus," and sure enough. But that's how it is, unfortunately. Yes.
I'm gonna go back to the early part of your talk where you asked, or you talked about, I think it was Jungle Alley, where all kinds of people, all kinds of characters, savory and unsavory, got together, and including homosexual. And then you said this is in the middle of Harlem, in the black area. The stereotype we have, see a lot of, blacks are the most homophobic people in the country. Is that a mistaken stereotype, or have things changed? And if so, why did they change? How did they change between then and today?
No, we're pretty homophobic. I don't know if we're the most, but that wouldn't surprise me. I can't argue against that. If we're not the most, we're in a close second to Hispanics maybe, but I doubt it. I'm pretty sure we're probably the most homophobic. No, I don't see it. I mean, that's why you constantly see, there's this big, the problem is, again, this is it's a white person thing. I mean, it's not as bad as atheism. But homosexuality is considered, it's the same as bestiality and pedophilia, and it's something that white people did. Europeans came over, and they decided, it's the most absurd story if you actually think about it, because like life started in Africa, it's where they started, and you're like, okay, and they go into this thing, and then they're like, oh, and then white people brought Europeans, which European means white apparently, you just can't be a black European, I don't know what that's about, but anyway, Europeans came over and introduced them to homosexual sex, and they just said, you know, that's great. We never thought of that, and we're going to start doing that. I mean, I don't understand the argument personally, but that's what's preached. That it's a white person thing, and that we wouldn't that bestiality and pedophilia are white people things, and that we just don't do that because it's just not black. It takes away from your blackness. But what you find is a lot of repressed homosexuals within the church. So. It's a sad state. Yes.
It's interesting, we were talking at dinner about the stripe that blacks have against them in this country, and then you're a black atheist, you've got 2 stripes. And then you said you're a black atheist woman, that's 3 stripes. And a black atheist woman homosexual is just not even in the game anymore.
No. No, black women there was a recent statistic. Yeah, Jamila Bay always quotes the statistics, so I should know it. But it's a recent statistic. I don't know if it's dollar-wise, but it's definitely percentage-wise with regard to tithing. Black women are the most likely to tithe at least as much as you're supposed to, so 10% or more of our salaries. And, you know, we're also at the bottom of the tadpole for jobs. You know, we're paid 60 cents on the dollar, so it's disturbing to see where our resources are going when we could. You know, I hate the idea that I see so many single mothers willing to go to church and tithe and not willing to attend a PTA meeting, you know, or not willing to vote because their vote doesn't matter. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but one of the things I try to encourage in the black community, you know, I'm not saying don't vote for the president, but the president is so far removed. Vote for, you know, your local congressman, vote for your local comptroller or whatever, the financial person, vote for, you know, your mayor, because these people have a direct, immediate effect on you. But we have this idea, and it's valid. I believe it's valid because of, you know, history and politics and politicians saying one thing and then they get in office and they do a different thing. But these are positions that a lot of people walk into in black communities, and oftentimes they have people that don't represent the community, people that don't even live in the community that vote. They have an address in the community, they vote on that address, they walk into office, and people don't even know, you know, how many people don't know who their mayor is. It's disgusting. And this is something that they have control over. So I really try to encourage participation in local politics and black communities. I don't know if I've been successful or not, probably not, but we keep working on it. Tangent, sorry. Yep.
Okay, when it comes to like the issues of family, when it comes to, well, theism or atheism or whatever, like, you said your mom was religious, like, how does your family handle, like, your parents or your siblings or whatever, your relatives, like, in general?
Well, see, my family is dysfunctional, so. We have, we have a lot. I mean, as passionate as I am about, I guess I am passionate about atheism, but I'm way more passionate about education. Because I don't care about the conclusion as much as I do as how you arrived at your conclusion. I don't strive to make people atheists. I say all of that to say that, you know, in my family we have one of my family members is like a bishop of some like mega church in Texas. So, I mean, we have a lot of people that are passionate about religion, but the great thing about my family is the fact that we have Jehovah's Witnesses that argue with the Baptists, that argue with the Catholics, that argue with me, and so nobody agrees on anything, and so I'm just like one of the many, and that's how we deal with it. My mom, she's in denial. She thinks I'm going to come around, but this was very interesting. When I was starting, so I graduated law school and I couldn't find a job, and for about a year. And so I ended up doing like freelance financial stuff, and then I opened my own firm. But I was trying to open this organization. I was like counting every freaking penny that I had saved, because 3 years of law school I also wasn't working. So now we're going back, you know, basically 4 years of not being gainfully employed. And when I wanted to open the organization, she offered to put up the $800 for the 501c3 status, which is like, I didn't take it from her because I know it was so against like what, but the fact that she offered it in support of something that I was so passionate about shows that she supports me. She'll never say it, but she definitely puts me before her religion. So that's the kind of relationship we have. Yes.
Did you have any role models that were African American or women that inspired you to work in education or law? Because you always hear that phrase, you can't be what you don't see. And when people don't see anyone that look like them in, you know, positions of power or academics, then they assume that they can't be that.
Yeah, I did. I spoke about education. There's so many different areas, there's so many different factors that play into a child's education. One of the things that I was fortunate to have, again, my parents were huge on education. They constantly instilled in me that I can do whatever it is that I want to do. We had Coretta Scott King came out with an encyclopedia, which had like all of these prominent African Americans that had made whatever contributions they had made to society. So I did see people that looked like me when I was growing up, but that was because my parents used to make me write freaking book reports for them. And you know, but it was helpful. But you know, back then I didn't understand like why I had to do extra homework that my friends didn't have to do. But that's very important. Who inspired me? I don't really know. My parents, I guess. I don't have anybody. You know what? Ida B. Wells. She was like a fair-skinned lady who escaped slavery. I don't know. I would say probably my parents. Somebody that was always there for me. So, you had a question? You had a question. Sorry. You?
I didn't have a question. I wanted to just comment about what you said about, I don't care so much about what people end up believing, but I really care about how they got there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
That critical thinking and how did you get there? Don't just think it.
Right.
Figure it out.
I mean, I've met atheists that are anti-feminism, or you know, that just don't believe women are people. It's not a lot of them, but you know, they're like online. You know, I've seen people who are a person, I should say, who's an AIDS denier. You know, they're in total denialism. So I mean, one of the things I see in the Black community, we were talking about this last night. a bunch of people that I've come across, will say, there's a cure for AIDS. And so, okay, how do you know that? They're like, no, the conspiracy theory. The pharmaceutical companies are suppressing the information, there's a cure for AIDS, and it's always, in my experience, the people I've come in contact to, maybe I'm just attracting crazies, but it's always some bushman in the backyard of somewhere in Africa, and I'm like, well, how are you, like, how are you getting this information? Like, where are you getting this information? And, I mean, Africa is a freaking continent, it's not a country, so where exactly in Africa are we talking about? Why does no one else know about it? Why is there such a bad AIDS epidemic in Africa? And, it's always the pharmaceutical companies that are suppressing it, which, these conspiracy theories run rampant in the African-American community. It's always, I'm not saying that there's not a justification for distrusting whites, particularly with older generations, but I believe that, we need to understand that we need to be able to critically think about how we come to our conclusions. And so I don't want someone to be like, oh, I'm an atheist. And then I ask them about, something else and, ghosts, and they're totally into ghosts, like I want them to be able to understand why, to be able to get rid of these silly superstitions. So, yes?
Just a comment, I just finished reading The Immortal Life
Oh,
of
keep
Henry
it,
Adams.
yeah.
And that is such a huge thing there, the science and the religion and who to trust.
Yeah, it's a serious, one of the other issues that I come across, people will always say, if you just teach the kids science, then, everything will be solved. And yeah, but no. In the Black community, we have an issue with science, the institution versus science, the topic, I'll say. We have a lot, eugenics was supported by science. So the first step in the Black community is getting over pseudoscience, separating pseudoscience from science, understanding that being able to get the community to trust science, or to understand why science, not trust science, but to understand the importance of science. And we understand, again, we're going back to critical thinking. But we have an extra hurdle in our community where we have to say, no, eugenics was pseudoscience, even though it was supported by the science, and the institution of science. We have to be able to explain to them it was never based on science. This was something to use to promote a political agenda. Again, there's a lot of distrust of science because of how it was misused, how the term was misused with regard to African American community. Yes.
Have you seen the video or read a transcript of Neil deGrasse Tyson's interview about race and about his story about that?
No, but I am madly in love with him. I met him when I was, we did an event at Howard University, and I met him and was totally just starstruck. I didn't even say anything. I took a picture with him and that was the end of it. And I should have done the whole speech because he's very big on scientific education among our youth, the Black, among the youth, particularly with African Americans. And I heard him speak on that, the lack of diversity. Somebody asked a question about women during some conference I saw on YouTube, and although he didn't talk about women, he talked about the lack of diversity, particularly blacks. And he also talked at the amazing meeting. No, sorry, it wasn't the meeting. He talked somewhere else about it as well, how we're leaving so many people, same speech I give, we're leaving so many kids behind because we're not giving them the opportunity, we're crippling them before they even start. And how many engineers are we leaving behind? How many, science, I mean, he's very much into the science. I would be like, how many lawyers are we leaving behind? But it's just me.
Well, I'd recommend the video of him. You can just Google Neil deGrasse Tyson on race, and it's about 5 minutes long, and he talks about going to the University of Texas, and one of his fellow wrestling teammates who was a Rhodes Scholar. He was also African American, and when he found out that Neil was gonna get his degree in physics or astrophysics, he said, well, you're wasting all of your talent on a field that's not gonna help the Black community. And so Neil said he felt really guilty about that, and he knew that it was right for him, but he thought, oh, what am I doing to help anyone? And
Right.
then he tells a story about going on the news at some point in the 80s. Someone had called his academic department because they heard about a solar flare, and these people had no idea what that meant. They thought the sun was going to explode or something. So he went on a local news station in New York and told them that it was going to be okay, and that, you know, it was just going to make the aurora borealis, and that's all it's going to do. And he said that that was the first time when he watched himself. He said that was the first time that he saw a black person on television being interviewed about a topic that was not dealing with being black. He was actually an expert on television,
Yeah.
and it had nothing to do, like, he didn't ask, how does the black community feel about solar flares? It wasn't at all relevant, and he said that, like, just in the past few decades, that was something that, you know, a few decades ago, you wouldn't have thought of that. If you saw someone black being interviewed on television, it was because it was about racism, or it was about poverty or discrimination. But he feels like now there's not just black kids, but also white kids that look up to him and see him as an expert and don't really see him as just, you know, a token minority anymore.
That's
So
awesome. I will definitely look that up when I go back home.
There's white women in love with him too.
I think everybody is. I know straight men that are in love with him. Yeah. Anybody else?
Thank you.